Hello, everybody. Hello, my assembled literary masses. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cal Morgan. I'm the board chair of the Center for Fiction. And on behalf of my colleagues in our wonderful board and our important organization, it's my honor to welcome you all to an event that's long been my favorite night of the literary year. Tonight, we gather to honor the 7 bold new voices who are finalists for our first novel prize and to announce the winner. We honor, too, the winner of the Maxwell E. Perkins Award, which recognizes those who devote their careers to the nurturing and sponsorship of important work. This year, I think it's worth noting, both the Perkins Award and the preponderance of the first novel prize finalists represent the enduring brilliance of independent publishing, that secret nerve center of our literary biosystem. As we begin, I'd like you to join me in recognizing our distinguished benefit co-chairs, and I will ask them to stand. Wendy Gimbel, Salman Rushdie, and Jacqueline Woodson. And most of all, I hope you'll join me in saluting the great Noreen Tomasi, a one-woman belief system for the importance of fiction in our lives. Noreen's work and passion are in the midst of remaking the center as a vibrant and exciting locus for storytelling in the 21st century. We'll hear a lot more about that later in the evening. Now, it's my great pleasure to bring to the podium our master of ceremonies for the evening. The man I'm about to introduce, who I will tear away from his dinner, is commonly called a humorist or a satirist. He's even been known to call himself a wag, which the dictionary defines as not only a person who makes facetious jokes, which are, of course, the best kind of jokes, but also as a person likely to be hanged. Let's see how that goes for him tonight. Please join me in welcoming the great and waggish P.J. O'Rourke.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't have to stand up here and tell all of you what the Center for Fiction does. Good fiction has an essence, a focus, a crux, a core. Good fiction has a center, and the Center for Fiction is the center of it. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here among people who care about serious fiction, although it's also a bit of a worry that we may have all the people who care about serious fiction right here in this room. No, that's not true. First, because there is no such thing as unserious fiction. Even the silliest example of genre junk tells a story. It may be a bad story, but bad stories have their peculiar merits. 50 Shades of Grey turns out to be the story of the American workplace. It becomes a better story when the protagonist's roles are reversed and Anna, instead of Christian, gets the handcuffs. People understand their lives through stories. People's lives are shaped by stories. Stories give existence to form. Without stories, we're born, shit happens, we die. You know? Trump happens. How are we to understand something like that without the brilliance of storytellers such as Robert Penn Warren writing All the King's Men? Or to bring things down to Trump's intellectual level, without the storytellers who wrote the script for Animal House. Particularly the part where the credits roll and we discover that the John Belushi character, Bluto, becomes Senator Blutarsky. But I want to thank President Trump for making me an expert on fiction. You see, I don't write fiction. I'm a news reporter. And it wasn't until Trump explained to me that everything I write is fake news that I realized how much I really knew about fiction. And then I felt confident enough to come here and discuss fiction with you, America's fiction mavens. So thank you, Abominable Showman. Thank you, Landlord of the Flies. And thank you for sharing your barber with Kim Jong-un and otherwise giving us fake newsmen so many lessons in fiction. As a newly minted expert in fiction, I would like to say a few words about Morgan Entrekin, who is about to receive the highest award for being an editor thereof. Now, what makes a good editor? Well, one, friendship. Morgan has been my friend for 40 years. Friendship is important for editors because writers are so busy making enemies. Sense of structure. Number two, sense of structure because writers, thy name is chaos. Three, good taste because writers don't have it. I mean, you can tell by the way they dress. There are some writers here tonight, and let me speak to your significant others, okay? Please tell the writers, no dressing in all black if you're over 26. And no plaid, stripes, checks, and paisley do not go together. And business sense, because writers rather famously cannot count to 11 without taking a shoe off. And five, a reserved table in an excellent restaurant because writers have been eating cat food in freezing garrets. Morgan Entrekin possesses all these things to such a great extent that he's getting an award for it. And to tell you more about that award, let me introduce Nan Graham. Nan, where are you? Okay, Nan Graham. Nan Graham is Senior Vice President and publisher at Scribner, and no mean editor herself. She has gone galley to galley and crossed blue pencils with no less than Frank McCourt, Hillary Clinton, Salman Rushdie, and Don DeLillo, and survived to tell the tale.
Go! So as you've gleaned, Morgan Entrekin is this year's highly deserving, infinitely celebratable winner of the Maxwell Perkins Prize. And it's my honor and duty to tell you a little bit about the man after whom this award is named. As the publisher of Scribner, I am personally grateful to Max Perkins every day of every year as thousands of new readers buy their copies of The Great Gatsby and The Old Man and the Sea, bequeathed to us during his tenure as Scribner editor-in-chief from 1920 to 1945. Perkins, like Morgan, was known for his courtesy and thoughtfulness, as well as his passion and idealism. When the Scribner editorial board tried to reject the novel that became This Side of Paradise, Perkins threatened to quit. A publisher's first allegiance is to talent, he told the board, and if we're going to turn down a talent like Fitzgerald's, we might as well go out of business. Perkins was also, like Morgan, a master of diplomacy, pragmatism, and when necessary, spin. His elegant letters could be appropriated by any editor in this room. The general brilliant quality of the book makes me ashamed to make even these criticisms, he wrote to Scott. That was to Scott about Gatsby. And later, so far, there has not been much of a sale, but all the publicity we have got ought to accomplish something for us. To Ernest, he wrote, everything looks to the good about the book in every way, except the business conditions. That's Max Perkins. He famously wore a beat-up fedora in his office at all times so that if an unwanted visitor stopped by, he could claim he was just stepping out. If he were among us now, Max Perkins would tip his fedora to Morgan, but first to Francesco Goldman, the ebullient author of 6 books, all published over 3.5 decades by his magnificent friend, Morgan.
Hi, thank you all for coming. I just flew up from Mexico City last night, where on the way in here, the gentleman at the door castigated me for wearing jeans. I just want to explain. I lost my only suit that I had down there in the earthquake. A pipe burst into my closet, a sewage pipe. And my wife's closet is over there, and all her things were spared, and they're all much nicer and more expensive than my things. But so this was the best I could do. Thanks. I'll just start right in. I don't know what voice of mine. I'm told like when I'm nervous or excited, I have a really high-pitched voice that like I know people in the literary world of Mexico City, it's like their favorite late-night party trick to imitate my voice. When I've got like under control, I talk more like this, but maybe some of you remember the first time you heard Morgan's art and love team versus the money and power team spiel. Hey, back then when we were all starting out, it was practically Morgan's calling card, his ideology. I'm trying to remember how exactly it went. When I asked my agent, Binky Urban, what she recalled about Morgan back in the day, she replied with her typical unerring precision, "Who can even remember that far back?" But I must have heard the art and love thing about 1,000 times, directed at me, at other young authors, at other people, aimed into the air in whatever was left of the night that we could still see at 6 or 7 in the morning. Life, Morgan would explain, especially at our age, was a choice between the art and love team or the money and power team. He'd made his choice. He could have done this or that, even stayed at Simon & Schuster or wherever it was, where he'd started his career editing Kurt Vonnegut and signing up Less Than Zero, gone on helping corporate publishing giants accrue ever more money and power. But instead, he'd chosen to take then moribund Atlantic Monthly Press off the hands of old Bronson Alcott, now that his daughter, Louisa May, decided she didn't want it. Remember, Morgan, all those nights in Nels, partying with Candace Bushnell and Louisa May Alcott? I always thought Louisa was going to marry Jay McInerney or maybe Dagoberto Gilb. Anyway, Morgan was going to rescue and revive Atlantic Monthly Press, move it from old Concord to New York City, and turn it into a permanent home for love and art team writers, editors, and publishing grunts. We'd be friends and in business forever in a world of our own, free from the tyrannies of money and power. As Morgan pitched it, depending on who he was talking to, you could choose the love and art team over the money and power one for the length of a book contract, or maybe just for a night, or for a lifetime, like it seems I did. Well, it worked out pretty well, didn't it, Morg? Here we all are, a lot of us anyway, still standing. I'm not sure when I first even heard of Morgan. Who can even remember that far back? It must have been in the mid-'80s. The wonderful Rust Hills at Esquire published a few of my very boyish short stories. The magazine had offered me a chance to write some journalism. That's how I'd ended up living in Guatemala City rent-free in an apartment that had belonged to my grandmother, eking out a living as a freelancer in Central America, trying to teach myself how to transform that experience of war and extreme violence, of daily tragedies and gruesome comedy into fiction, a task that I was not at all yet ready for. Morgan had asked Binky if I might have a collection of short stories just lying around. And she told him, well, he keeps claiming he's going to write a novel. One day, Binky reached me down there, by telephone it had to have been, and told me that Morgan Entrekin of Atlantic Monthly Press was offering a $10,000 advance on my novel, of which not a word yet existed. It must have been on my next trip to New York that I met Morgan and heard the Art and Love versus Money and Power spiel for the first time. And I have to admit, as I couldn't even claim I had art back then, or love, it sounded like a good deal to me. I'd never met anyone like Morgan before, a Southern gentleman with a golden General Custer head of hair, and such nice clothes, such an unshakably enthusiastic and benign way about him, such a buoyant openness, living in a funny old lady's apartment in the West Village that he'd rented from her furnished. We didn't have much in common besides a love of books and writing, and each in our own ways, passion and ambition, and we loved talking about these things into the early morning. And while we had nothing like a Nell's in Guatemala City, thanks to our many CD Barras de Mala Muerte tables, etc., and me, Morgan found a devoted brother in night crawling. Not that he needed another one. Reading through the testimonials of Morgan's authors printed in your programs, I kept thinking, oh yeah, I've been to that joint. On the way over here, in the Uber, the radio was playing Sleigh Bells by Frank Sinatra, and I was thinking, if you didn't know the words to that song, that could be Morgan in the early 90s or late 80s on a late December night singing about taking all of us to Mary Lou's. About 6 years late, wait, no, blah, 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 blah. I kept thinking, oh yeah, with my $10,000, I went to Madrid, bought a leather jacket, spent all my money, and without producing a page that I could use, found myself back in Guatemala City 6 months later, flat broke, back to freelancing. About 6 years later, I finally handed the novel in. Morgan is famously unrivaled for his loyalty to his writers, which seems to include an also unrivaled tolerance, so far anyway, for badly blown deadlines. As a writer who goes way past his deadlines time and again, I can tell you that patience and loyalty is almost like something you feel in your bones, like that perfect afternoon rain or playlist you listen time and again until not a note can distract you, and that somehow helps you steady your nerves and drives you slowly forward at your own snail's pace. That patience, trust, support, being one of the things that being on Morgan's Art and Love team concretely gives you. Gary Fisketjon was Morgan's partner in those by the seat of each other's pants trailblazing days of Atlantic Monthly Press. The other day, Gary recounted how at their first Frankfurt Book Fair, they shared the smallest sized available booth with a Scottish publisher of illustrated Scottish maritime books. I love that detail. You can just picture that guy in his admiral's hat and kilt and going. The other day, Morgan's gifts as an unmatchable pitchman for his authors began paying off there. Gary told me that theirs were the hit books of that fair. Okay, sure, Morgan had that UFO book that everyone was making fun of, but he also had Rian Milan's now classic My Trader's Heart. Gary had Toby Wolfe's This Boy's Life. No wonder the publisher of illustrated Scottish maritime books found himself having to lend all his chairs to the 20-something Golden Mane publishing wonderkins. Later, wanting to escape the corporate environs of the fair, Morgan and Gary brought Matthew Evans of Favor and some other international publishers to drink in a menacing German biker dive bar, where, said Gary, despite being dressed like Astor's pet horses, they somehow didn't get beat up, and Morgan pulled off his first international sales of a then unknown writer, P.J. O'Rourke. It was at Frankfurt, Gary told me, that Morgan began to understand the emerging global world of publishing in a way that perhaps not many other Americans did. He not only made Atlantic Monthly a major publisher of literature and translation, a tradition he has expanded powerfully since acquiring Grove Press, bringing the fiction of such writers as Antonio Lopez Lunes, Kenzaburi Owe, Martin Solares, and Jan Lianki into English. He also discovered that selling foreign rights was an effective method to fund the business side of Art and Love, and also to make his writers happy. When he managed to sell my first novel to a handful of foreign publishers based on just the few chapters I'd managed to hand in, that gave me the economic breathing space and the jolt of confidence needed to finally finish The Long Night of White Chickens. Morgan is renowned as an unmatched salesman of his writers' books. But it's his commitment to his writers, his conviction about the worth of every book he publishes, his irrepressible love for many of these that makes him persuasive, and that means everything. But that doesn't mean that he's not a showman. I was a writer with a weird name, my book had a weird title, and was partly about the war in Guatemala, not exactly a trendy subject in the New York of the early 90s. And yet my book party ended up in the New York Post on page 6. How did the gossip reporters even hear about it? At the party, a fist fight broke out between two women over a guy who worked at our press. And the next day in page 6, I got to read, "The book party for The Long Night of White Chickens turned into the short night of the red hens." Maureen came out to accompany me on the West Coast leg of my book tour. There we made it into the gossip pages again, this time in a Seattle Times column called Ace of Clubs. Headline, "Schmoozing at Croc with REM Guy" by Tom Phelan. It was a meeting of some minds last Saturday night when Atlantic Monthly Press owner-publisher Morgan Entrekin, less than zero, first-time Atlantic author Francesco Goldman, REM guitarist Peter Buck, lawyer cum club owner Stephanie Dorgan, and a couple of other strays round-tabled it in the lounge till closing at Dorgan's Crocodile Cafe. It was an interesting and intriguing intellectual cross-pollination. There was a spirited debate between Entrekin and Buck. Buck, "I bought your books and I read them, but I didn't like them." Entrekin, "I salute your right to buy my books, read them, and not like them." "Give me your address, I'll send you Francisco's book." Then, in an attempt to marry music and literature, Buck offered to play behind Goldman, reading some of the raunchier excerpts from his new book, The Long Night of White Chickens. But Buck wanted to do it in a place like the Deja Vu on Pike. Goldman thought it was an excellent idea. Entrekin said he'd miss his morning flight for such a performance. And Dorgan suggested the venue sucked. As far as we know, no reading took place. Throughout the evening, the group enthusiastically toasted the general medicinal and artistic benefits of tequila. Entrekin, a born tale-teller, told of his walk-on in the film The Player, based on one of his publications, and how it was severely severed. The New Yorker, by way of Tennessee, also explained why there was no real nightlife in Los Angeles. The mornings, he insisted, are just too bright. Head crocodile bouncer Big Bill Kuntz, who oversaw the corner booth bash, summed up the evening best. It was one of those Kodak moments. Notice how it's not the writer on tour, but the publisher who's described as a born tale-teller. And no, the reading with Peter Buck didn't happen because we went back to Morgan's hotel room and drank up his minibar, every last little bottle, down to the Baileys. And the last thing I remember about that night is Peter Buck stretched out on his back on the rug, arms and legs akimbo. I guess I thought that from now on, all my subsequent book tours were going to be like that. I don't know why they haven't been, but I guess I'll get to live a little bit longer. Morgan has published plenty of huge successes: Euphoria, The Sympathizer, Coal Mountain, History of Wolves, Peace Like a River, Roxane Gay's Untamed State and Difficult Woman, Matterhorn. He's published Will Safe, Candace Bushner, Sherman Alexie, Darcy Steinke, Nick O'Donnell, Charles Bowden if we go into nonfiction, but this is fiction, so we won't get started there. But books don't always work out. the way their publishers and writers hope and dream they will. And that's where the publisher-editor friend always comes together in the profoundest way. If that didn't work, Morgan always says, the next book can. You don't ever give up. And when your publisher never gives up on you, you never give up on yourself. Morgan and I have been through a lot. He's one of my closest friends. We've been through the euphoria of wonderful weddings that there were many times we never expected to get to experience the likes of. And we've been through shattering tragedy where he proved himself an indispensable friend. We got married pretty much the same year. We lost our beautiful, beloved mothers the same year. I don't want to cry, so I'll stop there. Around him, he has formed an extraordinary family made up of all the writers he publishes and all the folks who work at, and some who have worked at Grove Atlantic: Elizabeth, Ta, Amy, Deb, Corinna, Katie, Peter, Eric, Lauren. I could go on. That's the Art and Love team, the true Art and Love team. Let's all raise our glasses to the captain of the Art and Love team.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, PJ, and thank you, Frank, and thank you, Nan. And wow, it's really kind of moving. And, you know, I was saying it's sort of like being at your wedding. I didn't get married till I was 50, so it kind of, there was a lot of people from a lot of parts of my life there. And or somebody said, no, it's your bar mitzvah, but I've never been to a bar mitzvah. I'm a Southerner, was, so I grew up in Nashville. I never went to one, but it's amazing to look out in that hallway and watch people coming in, and so many people from so many parts of my life. And so what I have just, my remarks tonight, what I really want to do is I want to say thank you. I started thinking about what I was going to say tonight during Thanksgiving and thinking about this moment. You know, this is my 41st year in publishing, which is just amazing. Of like, and I've never had another job. I came out of school and started, and so this is my family and my community and my world, and I thank you all so much for being a part of it. I want to thank Noreen and the Center for Fiction Board for honoring me. I want to thank the previous honorees. It's a very distinguished company, the whatever we're going to call it, not the long gray line, that's what they call West Point, but there is a line here that we will continue. And, you know, I have so much to be thankful for. I think the greatest gift that you can receive in your life is to be born into a wonderful family. And I was born into a wonderful family. Some of you guys know them. Much of my wonderful family is here. My siblings, Huey and Janie and Mary, and my cousin Charles. I had an extraordinary mother and father. I lost my father 27 years ago. I lost my mother this September. They were extraordinary people. I saw Ron Chernow, and I said, you know, I'm going to mention you tonight because my father was an extraordinary collector of art, lover of music. He came up to the opera. One of the reasons I got into the opera was because if you wanted to see my mother and father, Daddy would fly up on Friday, go to the opera Friday night, Saturday matinee, and Saturday night. And so, like, if you wanted to hang out with him, you had to go to the opera. But the last book that he died suddenly of a stroke at a very young age, 63, which I'll turn in January, so it's seeming like increasingly young. But the last book that I published, and he was extraordinarily supportive. He was the one who helped me convince me. In fact, it was his idea that I leave Simon & Schuster and go start my own imprint. in 1984. I was 29 years old. But the last book he read was a galley of House of Morgan. And he said, I think this may be my favorite book of yours that I've ever read. And that book went on to win the National Book Award 4 or 5 months after my dad died, and was a really signal moment. That, and then the next year publishing PJ's book, Parliament of Horrors, that went on to the bestseller list, #1 on the bestseller list. But my mother and father were remarkable. My siblings are extraordinary. They're so supportive in what I do. My cousins, I grew up with 16 cousins, 14 of them in Nashville. We all lived within about 1.5 miles of each other. And it was such an amazing security blanket to move into the world having that base, because we liked each other and liked hanging out together. And then I've been lucky enough at the age of 50, where we met at 48, but to marry Rachel Cobb, who, as our first date, I said, I feel like we're from the same tribe. And a British friend later said, what tribe is that? And I'd never put a name on it. I said, well, that's the International Bohemian Southerner tribe. And it's a very small tribe. But in fact, I'm not even sure we've ever met a member. We maybe let one person in, I can't remember. But Rachel is a fierce, brave, extraordinary photojournalist who covered the Balkan Wars for the New York Times, and has done an extraordinary body of work over the years. But the greatest body of work is producing our son Alan, and it makes me so happy to have that in my life now. But you know, I grew up with a great group of friends in Tennessee that remained very dear and near to me, and 2 of them are here tonight, Mac and Kelly Linton. And Mac was one of the first supporters of my business as a shareholder in Grove Atlantic, and I have friends from childhood who I'm still very close to. But then, you know, moving into publishing, I started working at Delacorte and was introduced to this elegant man named Seymour Lawrence, known as Sam, and he liked some of my readers' reports, and he kind of brought me in. I think the pivotal moment in my life was when in January of 1978, I had been at work for about 4 months, and he laid a manuscript on my desk, and he said, would you read this and write me an editorial memo? It was a book called Jailbird by Kurt Vonnegut. And Kurt was a hero of mine. And it turns out, for long, complicated reasons, he really had never had an editor. And so at the age of 23, I became Kurt Vonnegut's first editor. And the book his previous book had been savaged by Benjamin DeMott on the front page of the New York Times Sunday Book Review. And in fact, savaged so badly that John Irving wrote a response to it in the New Republic. And so Kurt had asked Sam for an editor, and it ended up being me. And it was a transformative. Kurt and his wife Jill, Jill is here tonight, became my dear, dear friends. And they would invite me out to Sagaponack, and I suddenly was like, Kurt would go around saying, well, this is my he's like a young Maxwell Perkins. And so now I'm an old Maxwell Perkins. But it was, you know, when I read Kurt in the late 60s, Slaughterhouse Five was one of the most important and influential books of my childhood, of growing up in the South in the late 60s, early 70s. But that friendship was so important to me, and thank you, Jill, and to Kurt. But you know, it's we've created with Grove Atlantic sort of what, I don't know if there ever was a golden age of publishing, but it's sort of my platonic ideal of what a publishing house should be. And we try to publish with passion and with integrity, and try to bring our authors in as partners and share information with them. We try to support every book that we publish, and I couldn't do that without the shareholders who are my friends and partners. And Joan Bingham is the pivotal one there, and it's, you know, when we started this thing called the Literary Hub, and somebody wanted to take it to England and invest in it. And I'm going, no, man, I'm not trying to make money off this thing. I just want to kind of spread the word. But he goes, no, and so he's introduced me. And so there's a banker that he introduces me to, and he goes, well, is it not for profit, or are you going to monetize it? And I go, well, it's sort of in between. It's neither. And he goes, you can't be that. And I go, well, like, I've been running my business that way for 35 years. And I said, as long as all your shareholders are on the same page, you can. And that's why Grove Atlantic exists. And the Grove Atlantic exists because not only the support of the shareholders, but the support and the commitment of my extraordinary colleagues, from Elizabeth Smith, our editorial director, and Judy Hottenson, and Deb Seeger, and Amy Huntley, and the next generation of Katie and Allison and Peter and all of them. It's, I look forward to coming to work every day. When Rachel had a big photo project and we spent some time in the south of France and she wanted to spend a year there, we put our son in school, and I was coming and going, which was very exhausting, but there were two great things to learn at 58. One was that I really like living in New York. It was like I had to call my friend Charlie Glass like 4 days ahead to get him to drive over and stay with us for 2 hours so I could have an interesting conversation for dinner. Because the French vignerons, after a while, just kind of, it's enough about wine, but and in French. But what I also realized was that I love my job, and I love coming to work every day. And what we have is what in my friend Sam Lawrence called the industry. It's such an extraordinary group of people. The booksellers, Richard and Lisa and Sarah and Sally and these many, Ezra, all these friends who are here tonight, thank you for being here, but they are really doing the heroic work on the front lines. They are all literary hubs in their communities, fighting the good fight. And to have those friendships and work with them over the years, bringing authors out into the world, it's enriched my life so much, and I'm so grateful to all of you. The international publishers and agents, and I know Elizabeth Ruga came from Berlin, and Raf is here from London, and a number of people, Maria said, have reached out and supported this evening. And it's, when Gary and I went there in 1986, we almost exploded with enthusiasm because we met all these people all over the world who loved books so much and were so cool and were so interesting. And it's just, it's been one of the greatest gifts that I've ever been given is that community. But finally, the greatest gift of all is the writers and the authors. And, it's something that I've learned over the years. I remember Kurt once wrote me a note about we were in the middle of editing something. He was frustrated with it, and he said in it more or less, for 38 years, Morgan, I've been going into a room and making shit up. And he says, it's exhausting. And I said to myself, I bet it is, right? And they're the ones doing the heavy lifting. And I think one of the things that I've learned is over the years is that we are all in their debt all the time, every day. And that's what I try to communicate to the people that I work with, to the young people, to recognize that, it can sometimes get a little bit exhausting, and we can sometimes be frustrated, but it's really, we're here to serve the writers, and I hope I never forget that. And sort of in closing, I was thinking, well, I'll make some general pontifications about the state of the business, and these are weird times, and it's like, this is a room full of gatekeepers, right? And I'm really proud to be a gatekeeper. And do you know what we really need now? We need more gatekeepers, because we've had this tidal wave of data and information. My friend Charlie Winton, who built Publishers Group West up, and he said, we were at Stanford together in the mid-'70s, that we weren't paying any attention to computers. We were like, sniffing laughing gas and taking hallucinogens, but it was like, he goes, Morgan, his wife who was there with us, Barbara, she says, we got into the information business, and I said, yeah, but the wrong end of it. It's like, but what I changed my mind. We're still at the right end of it, because we need gatekeepers. We have so debased the gates, man, they've disappeared into the clouds, and we've got to rebuild those gates. And what we have to do is we have to rebuild them. One of the things that, someone mentioned about the independent publishing and the authors coming from independent publishing, but one of the things I've been so impressed by, because when I came into this business 40 years ago, there were many independent publishing houses. The Scribners still own Scribners, the AA still own AA, the Macmillans, et cetera. But what I've been really encouraged by is watching as the conglomerates and these multinational media companies came in, the values of our community and of our industry have been maintained. The standards and the commitment to excellence and the integrity. And it's great, and it really is I think, a testament to the leaders of those big five now corporations. And I think it's also a testament to the people of my generation, a little bit older and a little bit younger, who were brought up with those values. And what I would say in closing tonight is that I hope this award goes for another 40 years. I probably won't be here to be at the 80th, or what would be my 80th anniversary in the industry, because I'll be 102 years old. But what I would say to the young people is, carry it forward and don't lose that sense of those values and those standards and those ethics, because it is what differentiates us from the digital people, and and I think it's more important than ever now. And so carry it forward, and in the 40 years from now, remember me. Thank you.
Congratulations, Morgan, and well spoken, well said, and, well received, because I would like to think that we're all on the art and love team in this room. Sometimes we have to go up to corporate and, little Dungeons and Dragons, but at home, we're all on the art and love team. And thank you, Francisco, for pointing that out and for giving all sorts of insight into the early Morgan. Seattle has a gossip column. Plaid shirts in fashion again this year. It must be fascinating reading. And Morgan, I just want to thank you for being Morgan. Morgan has done more than edit and publish brilliant writers. He has edited and published me. Morgan is a man with broad talents, a brilliant mind, excellent education, charm, energy, focus, and determination, who looked around at all the opportunities that life offered him and said, "I'll bet they'll pay me less in publishing." And Morgan stayed there. He stood the test, He has remained undaunted by the flaky modernists who would burn down the house of 19th century English literature to get the nails. He has been unfazed by an American public that would rather eat those nails than read anything longer than a tweet. He has braved the little tweets who run Silicon Valley and seem intent on destroying the publishing industry. He has come to the aid of that publishing industry as it drags itself kicking and biting into the 20th century. And he has turned a resolute face to a 21st century, making every attempt to descend into a barbarism incapable of any literature at all. Morgan is a legend in the business, not least of all for his devoted involvement with his authors. And all of you know what involvement with authors means. It means staying up all night and keeping pace with them as they pour, operative word, pour, out their woes, drink after drink. Ladies and gentlemen, Morgan Entrekin is a man who has sacrificed his liver to literature. Now, on to the rest of the evening. After dinner, the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize will be awarded. The prize is 6 years living in your parents' basement boiling water for ramen noodles on a hot plate. No, you first novelists have already won that prize. Better things are to come, but not until we've eaten dinner. Okay? Thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, I am Noreen Tomasi, and I'm the director of the Center for Fiction. It is so for me, it's so wonderful to see that video and see our plans for a vibrant new Center for Fiction in New York City to come to fruition in this absolutely astonishing way. But I want to say that when I sat with Peter Gannett, who is here tonight somewhere, Peter, could you stand? In 2008, who was our chairman at the time, and thought about a vision for what the Center for Fiction could be, I didn't have any idea really that it could be so gloriously realized. I hope you'll all come to Brooklyn with us, and I hope that you will support us, enjoy it, and be with us as we make this wonderful transition. I want to say one thing, though. No one does anything like this alone. As you all know, all of you in the room who bring books to the public, you know that as an editor or as a publisher, it is always a team effort. So I would like to thank many people. It's my great pleasure at an event like this to do the thank yous. So I want to first say very quickly, thank you to my staff members, Gwen Rule and Kristen Henley, for that wonderful video. And also to Trevor Garekis for his wonderful original music for the video. I would also like to thank the astonishing, wonderful, incredible Jackie Woodson for her incredible narration. And I want you all to know she's a Brooklynite, so she's going to be there. I would also like to thank my board of directors. I couldn't ask for a better board of directors. So to Cal and all of the board members, I hope you'll stand up for a minute and be recognized. To create something like this is a daunting enterprise, and I couldn't have done it without the undying and devoted support of my board members. I would also like to thank this evening Wendy Gimbel, Salman Rushdie, and Jackie Woodson, our dinner co-chairs. And there's a few board members I would like to call out in particular for their incredible help with organizing this dinner and making it so wonderful, and that is Lizzie Birkeland, Maria Campbell, and Nan Graham. Lizzie, Maria, and Nan, thank you. I'd also like to thank the Amazon Literary Partnership for their support, Audible, Wendy Gimbel, and Dub Lefasky, Grove Atlantic, Ingram Content and Publishers Group West, and Kevin Morris. Thank you all so much for your contributions. And finally, I'd like to thank the people who have made our gift bags so wonderful tonight, and do not neglect to get a gift bag on your way out. So Algonquin, Atlantic Monthly Press, Catapult, Europa Editions, IG Publishing, Leafland, and Little Brown, thank you so much. And also, I don't know if you heard it because you were all talking during the cocktail hour, but we had the absolutely extraordinary Sugar Vendel on piano during cocktails. Thank you so much, Sugar. It is so wonderful for me to, as a reader, and I am primarily a reader, to sit in a room with people who have brought so many wonderful books into my life and into the lives of so many readers. So thank you all so much, the writers, the editors, the publishers, the enablers in the room. Thank you so, so much from the bottom of my heart. Books have changed my life, as I'm sure they've changed yours. And one of the things that is most exciting to me in the Center for Fiction is not only securing the future for the Center for Fiction, but is the work we do in 3 areas. One, to support emerging writers at the very beginning of their careers through our Emerging Writer Fellowship Program. And could our emerging writers stand? There they are. I want all of you in publishing to take a good look at them, because we receive over 500 applications every year for our Emerging Writer Fellowships, and only 9 are chosen. So you know they're extraordinary writers. Something else that's very, very dear to my heart that this dinner helps to support is creating a next generation of readers and writers, and making sure that kids in our most challenged schools and neighborhoods in New York City have access to books, meet writers, and read. And so I want you to be aware of our Kids Read Books for New York City's Schools program, and I want to thank you for your support for this dinner, which also helps to support that very important program. So thank you so much. Finally, one of the things that I love most about my job is our first novel prize, because it is a way of recognizing extraordinary writers that all of you in this room have brought to press. And so it's my great, great pleasure to introduce last year's winner, Kia Corcoran, who will present our first novel prize this year.
One year ago, after several sorrowful weeks immediately following the election, I must admit there were 2 nights when I temporarily forgot the woes of the world. The first was the evening of the first novel fete, when I finally got to meet all the other shortlisted authors, especially exciting because I'd made a point to read all their books. And the second was the awards dinner. And then 2017 happened. Listening to the news this morning, I came close to crying. One of the few bright lights of the past year, the multitudes rushing to the airports to protest the first Muslim travel ban, was shattered by yesterday's Supreme Court decision authorizing the ban's 3rd incarnation. Still, there was hope in the will of the people prevailing with last month's elections of, among others, 2 progressive transgender women to city and state office in Minneapolis and Virginia. Way too much work to be done to give in to despair, and as writers, we wield a mighty weapon with the word. As Angela Davis put it, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. The 7 shortlisted books for the 2017 First Novel Prize each demonstrate this courageous resolve to speak truth to power. After an exhausting and at times agonizing task of narrowing 145 submitted novels down to a long list of 22, the 5 judges, Sonia Chung, Ann Landsman, Fiona Mazel, Rick Moody, and myself, came together and found out just how passionate we had become about those semifinalists. The meeting was tough and tormenting, a necessary struggle, given literary voices so divergent and robust and original. And when the dust cleared, a magnificent 7 remained. And now I'd like to speak briefly about each of the books we are honoring tonight. In As Lie Is to Grin, with scenes alternating between a young Black man's life in New York and on a Vermont white university campus, and ultimately revealing a gasp-inducing secret, author Simeon Marcellus challenges not only the social establishment, but also conventional literary structure in his very singular take on race, class, and assimilation in contemporary America. In Empire of Glass, Caitlin Salamini's lyrical and dazzling language guides us through the compelling parallel lives of 2 young people during the Chinese Revolution and their breathtaking intersection, underscored by a memoir in footnotes and the censored work of a legendary Tang Dynasty poet. Julie Lekstrom Himes' exquisite Mikhail and Margarita, an imagining of a love story between Mikhail Bulgakov and the Margarita of his magnum opus, evinces the mystery and dexterity of 19th century Russian literature catapulted to 20th century totalitarianism. In the letters, diary entries, and court transcripts of the second Mrs. Hockaday, Susan Rivers adroitly propels the reader to the American Civil War era. The narrative is masterful and haunting in its gradual, jaw-dropping reveals, mysteries of dead infants and blue-eyed slaves. In Jaroslav Kalafar's sublime Spacemen of Bohemia, the language Kafkaesque in its intellect and richness, and in normalizing the fantastical, the reader is transported into outer space where, through the eyes of a Czech astronaut accompanied by an extraterrestrial spider, Earth suddenly comes into sharp focus. The crimes of the former communist state and the crimes of the current capitalist state. Annabelle Kim's Tiger Pelt renders in harrowing and graceful detail Korea just before and after division, the Japanese occupation, the American War, starvation and PTSD and comfort women, who would more accurately be called comfort girls, painting an honest landscape of those war victims who suffer first and foremost, civilians. And in What to Do About the Solomons, Bethany Bell infuses a wry wit to her economical, Hemingway-esque saga about this extended family spawned on an Israeli kibbutz. With the spare prose and in events woven seamlessly into the story, the reader ponders racism against Arab Jews, inane and fatal military exercises, and even civil forfeiture in the US, while relishing a deliciously compelling and surprising journey. And the 2017 Center of Fiction First Novel Prize goes to Mikhail and Margarita by Julie Lekstrom Himes.
Well, I'll first begin by saying there are a lot of you out there, and I'm not an extrovert, so be patient. Thank you so much. This is such an enormous honor, and being here the last couple days and meeting the other finalists for this truly amazing prize. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm, again, truly honored and happy to be numbered among such amazing writers. I'd first like to thank Mr. O'Rourke. My husband is a huge fan of yours, and I have gained a tremendous amount of currency being here tonight. with you as our MC. He is tremendously jealous that he is actually home with our 16-year-old teaching him physics and pre-calculus and not here with me. So thank you. At some point, I'm going to have to ask you for your autograph. This book for me was a personal quest, and I think that's true for all novelists. We approach the story because the question that we're trying to understand is a personal one. And for me, it was, why am I doing this? This is so hard. Writing fiction is so difficult. And trying to pull a story together, why am I putting all this time when I could be doing other things that are probably more productive? So I looked to someone who faced far greater odds than I did. He faced imprisonment, tremendous loss, censorship, death, and yet fought very hard against a society and against a regime that was very much against him, despite the fact Stalin was actually a fan of his work. So for me, taking his story and a fictionalized version of that story to the extremes of that situation was a way for me to understand, and for perhaps, hopefully, all of us to understand why we do this. I think for a lot of writers, when we go through the process of writing, we kind of imagine our audience that might potentially read our story one day if we're fortunate enough to have it published. And for me, my audience was very much people like you, my fellow writers, people who care about literature. And so I'm, again, tremendously honored to be here and frankly quite surprised. So more specifically, though, the people I absolutely must thank, my agent, Adam Shear, who had, thank you, who had faith in me back when the story wasn't done, when it actually looked pretty perplexing, I'm sure. And but what a wonderful reader and supporter he was for me. It's been a terrific relationship, and I'm very grateful. I'm also, of course, tremendously grateful to Michael Reynolds and his entire staff at Europa Editions. Michael, you have a tremendous group of people who you work with who have been with me every step of the way. Rachel answers every single one of my emails, every single one of my frantic calls. She's been awesome. Everyone you work with has just been wonderful. And you, of course, just your insight and your wisdom, scarily, is so amazing. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank and call out the people who've really helped teach me how to write. Amazing writers in their own, but also amazing teachers, Jim Shepard and Margot Livesey, who I've worked with over many years, who've taught me craft and taught me the essence of fiction, and they are the ones that I aspire to. And of course, my family, my husband, Dan, and my children who have been putting up with this for many years, but who are huge supporters. I'd like to thank all of those who have read my work when it was horrible, when they were just there to give me insight and to give me feedback. And a dear friend of mine who's with me tonight, Robin McLean, an amazing writer herself. And so for all of those who've been with me through this journey. And then, of course, the Center for Fiction, who provides the great opportunities for writers. And then at Boston, of course, Grub Street and Chris Castellani and his staff, who I began my journey with them, and they are, of course, important for all young writers to grow and to learn the craft. I think that's it. Thank you so much. This is amazing. Wow. Thank you.
Okay, let's get the co-chairs up here and Francisco, and to give a little toast. Yeah, Salman. Who we got? Wendy Gimbel. We need Wendy Gimbel. We need Jacqueline. Salman Rushdie, Francisco.
Oh, we need
need a drink?
Thank you.
Hi. How are you?
Is that my thing down there? I think it is. I looked it up here.
Maybe. Okay. Let us close out the evening with a toast. With a toast to Morgan, with a toast to Julie, with a toast to all the other first novelists, and with a toast to the Art and Love team.